Welcome to another episode of the Hat Collecting Talk Show. I am your host, Lacey Artemis, and today I am joined by Jimmy Ruffian, who is a musician, a broadcaster, an activist, a cat dad, and more. He is the man behind the Rough Go musical act and the Rough Report political internet show. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Wow, you made me sound like I wear so many hats.
That's kind of the point. You get the idea.
All the hats I have, yes.
Yeah. Just one little quick thing to note. It might not even be noticeable, but I'm a little bit under the weather today, so I might sound a little bit rough.
That's all right.
But we should be fine because I try to let the guest do most of the talking anyways.
Yeah. I'm good at that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you do an internet show, so
Yeah.
that makes sense. As you might have picked up on by now, if you've watched the preceding 3 episodes before this one, I have a series of questions that I follow and kind of do a few minutes for each question usually. So cool. Our first question here is, tell me about some of the projects that you're currently working on.
There's a few things on the burner right now, so to speak. I'm, if anything, guilty of having too many irons in the fire, but primarily things, I think we can all relate a little bit. I always intended to do the podcast I've been thinking about for many years. In fact, if you go to my YouTube channel, I have a video from about 5 years ago that was called The Rough Report Episode 1, where it was like a pre-recorded thing that I did. And then I literally never touched the channel again after that, always intending to kind of like, okay, I'm going to do that again one day. So COVID happened. And so naturally I thought, okay, this is a great opportunity to, collect that hat and start doing the podcast. So that's been kind of an ongoing project. I'm always sort of rethinking the show in like its format and ways to improve it. And, so far the format has been kind of pretty loose and unscripted. I just generally have some guidelines that I'm following. Like I'll open a bunch of tabs with like news stories that I want to cover. And that's basically like from left to right. That's my show. It's an ongoing project. I always consider it perpetually in its beta testing phase. And then on top of that, of course, there's the musical project. I just played my first show since like February on Saturday, September 5th. And that was interesting because it was like I was on stage kind of facing a window playing to the people outside. So that seems to be the way a lot of shows are for the foreseeable future. And I've been working on an EP this entire time while COVID's been going on as well. As originally actually supposed to be released in March, but we took COVID as a bit of a blessing to kind of not rush it and take a really slow approach to it and make sure that, the whole process of releasing it is done, I don't know, a little wiser than I've tended to try and release things in the past, the EP is essentially done. Most of the mixing and mastering is done on it, but now it's just kind of hashing the plan to release it and subject the world to it. So the exciting things there, I released 1 track onto SoundCloud so far, just to kind of give people a taste of what's to come. So like overall between like the podcast and the music, I consider them almost like a symbiotic sort of thing, right? Like the music kind of has its political connotations, and then the podcast obviously does, because that's the majority of the content on it. And so that's like basically my 2 main things, sort of one big thing.
Yeah, no, that's I know, and again, I know there's other stuff kind of going on, but we usually focus on kind of our main stuff that we're doing. I kind of myself also have 2 sort of main prongs right now, and then a little bit of kind of side stuff that I'm doing. And it's interesting for me because for a long time I never had less than like 3 things going, and I felt like I never could. And now it's like, oh, but then when you land on something, it's like, oh, this scratches several itches and it feels like really
Yep.
like I hit something. And it's like, oh, hey, now I actually am content doing like being able to focus on fewer things finally.
Yeah, it's a good feeling when you like, yeah, suddenly you feel a little satisfied with yourself and what you're doing, and it's like, oh, okay, this is the thing. This is what I got to keep doing, and yeah, that's sort of what the rough go, yeah, has become for me at this point. It scratches, as you say, several itches. Yeah.
Mhm. So interesting. I feel like coming out of that question is a reason why I put this one second in the list is when you were younger, if you remember, do you remember what you wanted to be or do when you grew up?
Yes, it is essentially this. I like grew up. Always sort of being an entertainer, so to speak. Not necessarily very political. That didn't come until a little bit later in my life. But yeah, as a kid, like one of the people I admired the most was Jim Carrey, and being kind of admiring his road to success. And he's a fellow Canadian that grew up not too far from where I grew up in Hamilton, and kind of knowing his propensity for high energy, kind of almost like, ADHD level type of comedy. I identified with that a lot. And, it's just that feeling and expressing myself in that way already sort of came naturally. So, like, I was a drama kid in school, I was in the music classes, doing all that stuff to just sort of become a better entertainer. But then as I got into my teens, I think I was in 10th grade, not to date myself too much, when 9/11 happened. And, such like a big kind of, everywhere in the news and the media and your adults around you are telling you how big and important this thing is supposed to be. And I kind of had no concept of what was going on, and I didn't know what to make of it. And that was a waking up moment for me to start being concerned about what's going on in the world politically, and that was kind of my road to becoming a leftist, essentially. And kind of like, I grew up in a punk rock background too, musically speaking, and punk rock for the most part has always been a kind of progressive leftist ideology in a lot of ways. And so I identified with it for that reason. And that's what kind of got me thinking along those lines, that like music and politics, or my art in politics and my self-expression in politics, are somewhat married to each other. They're intrinsic to each other. So yeah, it was I kind of grew up leading myself to kind of be in this position, I think. Yeah. It's like, I think I imagined myself having, as people tend to do, imagine myself having a much bigger audience and being, a much bigger rock star and, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, I think I'm still doing what I always sort of intended to.
The reason that I like to ask that question is because I am curious. I know for a lot of people, the thing that they thought that they wanted to do when they were younger isn't what they end up doing, or maybe if they do end up doing it, it ends up being relegated to like a side project. And so very few people actually get to like do what they've always wanted to do as like a job. And
Yeah.
I'm curious to see through these interviews how often that is the case.
Yeah, it's semi. Like, I would call myself, in terms of like actually making a living off of what I do. Largely speaking, I'm if I did the plus minus over the years, I'd still be very much in the minuses. No doubt about it. I've spent more money trying to accomplish this than I have made it. But I can say, like, ever since I'm more focused on being a solo musician and kind of not um, having the constraints of working with other people, not to say working with other people is always negative, but just, that's how it worked out for me. And yeah, like I started being more successful after that, when I could kind of take control and do what I wanted to do, and something that I've always tried to do my entire adult life is no matter what job I had, to make money and keep a roof over my head and whatever, it always had to a degree, leave room to be able to do music, leave room to be able to do, these creative projects. If if it was the type of job that would consume my life, it would be a job that I would not have for very long.
Mhm.
So yeah, I just always consider this such a high priority that, like, even if I don't make any money off of it, even if I don't become, like, what you call a true professional, it's something I would regret not doing regardless.
Mhm.
So I just have to. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you'd said that you were kind of came up in like the punk scene in a punk band, like because
Yep.
that's kind of one of the other questions is like kind of when did you get started? How long have you been at this? Like how old
Mhm.
are you now, kind of thing.
Yeah, in terms of actually becoming a musician, I picked up guitar when I was 12 years old. It was about the beginning of the school year, so it would have been September of seventh grade, something like that. And I picked it up because my dad was a guitar player, like more of a hobbyist and stuff, but he had a few guitars around the house. And then my older brother started learning a couple songs on guitar, and then I thought, well, I could do that. And so, you see a little bit of monkey see monkey do sort of thing going on there. And so I started learning guitar as well, and I kind of became obsessed with it, and that was sort of my thing ever since. um, and yeah, that's sort of what led me all through school from then on to kind of be the drama music arts kid. um, I was like a bit more of a jock before that, to be honest. I was a hockey player. I was on the basketball team in middle school, that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, then punk rock came along,
Mhm.
and so yeah, pretty much, I guess, yeah. The road was really kind of cemented right around when I was about 12 years old.
Okay. And are you comfortable saying how old you are now?
Yeah, I'm 34.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm 34 now. So I've been doing this music thing for 22 years, I guess, altogether. Yeah, and it's just kind of getting better all the time. It feels like so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another one of the aspects of this kind of line of questioning is to kind of examine that idea that like if you don't reach a certain point of success or a point of accomplishment by age 30, then you might as well give up because it's too late. And I know that's
It's
not
absurd.
true, but
I
but
think that's
it's
completely absurd, and I know a lot of people have that attitude. That is like a really kind of common cultural phenomenon, but, yeah, I can't say I'm on board with that idea.
Mhm,
It's just a weird sort of arbitrary sort of cultural milestone that you're supposed to turn 30 and suddenly be the perfect image of traditional adulthood, and that ain't me, and that that isn't most of the people that I know.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. That always seemed way too boring to me.
Yeah, it's something that I think I internalized a lot more when I was younger, but I think I've really like I'm 36 right now,
Mhm,
and I'm seeing how like basically to be fair to yourself, you have to recognize like first you kind of have to know like you have to know what you want to do, you have to know what you are doing, how to like accomplish that, and then you of course it's going to take a few years to work your way up there. So it's I think that that idea kind of assumes that like everyone knows exactly what they want to do and goes exactly on that track. So like if you do that path, then it would
mhm.
make sense that by about the age of 30 you'd probably be where theoretically you're supposed to be.
Yeah. And then, there's so many things that can happen in your life that,
Mhm,
take you off the rails a little bit. Like, I've been kind of talking like been so super focused on my career path in this regard, but, you know, uh, there was times where I ran into mental health issues where I feel like, there's a good period in my mid 20s where a bunch of years were just basically didn't even happen. They're just kind of a blur
mhm,
of darkness. And things like that happen. Being kind of stuck in series of dead end jobs, and you can't, like I was grew up in Hamilton, and I wanted to get out and move to Toronto, way sooner than I ended up doing it. And, all those sort of things. Life just doesn't go the way you plan, oftentimes. And I think that it shouldn't necessarily be seen as a marker for somebody's personal value or ability to be successful.
Yeah, and it's as I've seen other people comment, it's kind of more of a like it's just another one of those things like focusing on like youth as like a social currency in a sense.
Yeah.
And like there's the 30 under 30 lists and
Yep.
things like
Yep.
that. And but I'm glad you brought up the mental health thing because that
Mhm.
is something else I like to talk about because that absolutely is another thing that affects this. And I think that anyone who does end up having to deal with mental health issues, which I know we both have,
Mhm.
you have to kind of like learn how to wear new hats to deal with that and to work through it. And so,
Yep.
if you'd like to talk about any particular experiences you've had and how you've worked through them, feel free.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, the first real step, and it seems like obvious, it's cliched for a reason, I guess, is recognizing you have a problem. I think it's at least in the years of school and the kind of culture I was in that time period, uh, mental health was still not something that was on a lot of people's radar. The idea of anxiety and depression being as prevalent as it is, it just wasn't thought of in that way. I think that attitude, uh, where we started talking about this a lot more often, probably came as a direct result of the uptick in social media and how, like, when that exploded around what was that, like 2008? I think when Twitter and Facebook kind of really started hitting their stride. Um, or at least the years surrounding that. And I think that it was from the result of social media and the common person bringing this up that kind of like now you have the Bell Let's Talk campaign and things like that. So yeah, when I first started experiencing these problems, it was like it didn't feel like there were any resources out there. And especially my first kind of foray, I guess you could say, into really bad mental health problems was OCD. And when I was diagnosed with that, and I was getting obsessive thoughts about awful, violent things happening to myself, loved ones, and they would kind of like consume your consciousness, and you'd spend the day just trying not to think about those things, and it leads to compulsions. It leads to just devoting a huge amount of your energy into just not thinking about things that distress you. And one of the most helpful things I ever heard, there was like one particular night where I just thought I was losing my mind. I couldn't sleep. I called the I think it was 911. It wasn't even like one of those mental health emergency hotlines. I think I literally called 911. I must have been about 22 or 23 at the time, and kind of like telling them what I was going through. And I was like, it's like, I feel like I've just snapped, excuse my, the French, that I've gone really off the deep end. There's no recovering from this. I've become, for lack of a better term, a complete whack job. And there's no coming back from this, and the person on the other end of the phone was really helpful and kind of explained 911. A lot of people don't realize this, it is for these types of emergencies too. You can use this number for this purpose. And I ended up being connected with some sort of psychologist or nurse through that conversation. It was something like that. Mind you, I was in a lot of distress, so I can't remember all the details. But then the person I was eventually connected with was just basically like, okay, so you're thinking about these awful things, and you're thinking you're an awful person because you're thinking about these awful things, and it's like, so these thoughts distress you. And I was like, well, yeah, of course. And she's like, well, the good news is people who are legitimately psychopaths don't really get distressed by the idea of horrible things happening, or them themselves doing horrible things. It doesn't really stress them out like that. So you can probably rest assured you haven't truly lost your mind. It's just that you're experiencing symptoms of OCD, and there's ways to treat that and mitigate that. And for the first little while, I really was against pills. Like, I didn't want to go on medication. I kind of had a lot of the bad stigma ideas about what that meant, and what it would do to you and all that sort of thing. And like, you just become a pill popper. And like, so obviously with a lot of things I said, describe myself as going out the deep end, being a whack job, don't want to be a pill popper. I had a lot of bad stigma, toxic ideas about what it meant to have mental health problems. So you kind of get wrapped up in a lot of weird denial. You don't want to think you're that ill. You don't want to think this is a real problem. It's something like, your mind got you into it. Surely your mind can get you out of it. All these sort of ideas that people tend to think when they're not better educated about mental health. So that, kind of just focusing on or sort of being obsessed in a manner of speaking with wanting to be better. I was just like, I have all these goals in life. I have all these ambitions. It drives me crazy that this would be holding me back. So that was where it sort of started being committed to kind of improving. But it's, ups and downs over the years. I would say now I did eventually get to the point where over the past couple of years, I chose to start using SSRIs. Before that, got into cognitive behavioral therapy and doing all those sorts of exercises to mitigate the OCD. So now, kind of leading up to now, I'm in a much better place than I have been in a long time. And the only regret I would have about any of it looking back is that I just didn't do it sooner, and I wish I didn't have those stigmatic ideas. But it is what it is, and you try and do the best with the cards you're dealt.
Absolutely. And I'm also currently on, I think they're SSRIs, the ones I'm on, but I'm on a medication for that. And I've been to several different therapists over the course of my life, and I've always found that it's helped me. And I think initially there was more of that reluctance, but then when I realized like, oh, I feel better from this, you recognize like, okay, there's stigma and then there's feeling better. It's kind of like, there's medication and there's not functioning at all. And so it's, the lesser of two evils kind of thing. But it's really unfortunate that mental health support is so stigmatized, and that a lot of people just think, because we're, like with a lot of things in life, we're told to tough it out and to just pull up our socks, and that really doesn't work a lot of the time.
We all got problems, and like those sort of dismissive statements about how your problems aren't real and it's just in your head, and kind of not to get too into the weeds philosophically speaking, but some of the things I touch upon in the show is the philosophy that influences politics. And that's I spend I haven't done it a lot on the show so far, but in my personal life I spend a lot of time dissing Nietzsche because of that. I think Nietzsche and his whole Übermensch idea of being the master of your own reality, and like you kind of existing as this independent being in the universe. I think like that idea is very culturally pervasive, and kind of leads to people thinking these things like, oh, I don't need to depend on others. I don't need to depend on therapy. I don't need to get help. I'm me. I got this. And it's like, people don't realize how bad that can be for them until, years have gone by,
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're gonna shift in now to the next question here. Cool. Kind of circling back a little bit. It's there's a bit of there's method to the madness of this series of questioning, I like to think. Do you think that, or I shouldn't say, do you think? Do you have like a peak time of day where you feel the most, I don't want to say the most productive, because that feels like it's kind of supporting the capitalist idea that we all have to be productive to earn our keep. But like, is there a time of day that you just feel the most able to optimize and to do your best.
Yeah, I guess like in a manner of speaking, way like is there a time of day where I just have all the spoons?
Yeah, I guess that's the way to put
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, and it also depends on the day. There's some days, still mentally speaking, especially because I've been slowly trying to wean off of the SSRIs I've been taking because I feel like I've kind of hit a point where I've maximized my benefit of them, and continuing to take them is just um, it's sort of redundant and mundane. But so getting off of them has been a little bit of a journey, but I've figured out now how to manage it and manage the symptoms of withdrawal and stuff like that. But it's actually funny. One of the symptoms of withdrawal is getting brain fog and losing track of your thoughts, which just happened to me. So remind me again what the question was.
This question started out specifically, are you a morning person, a night
Right.
person? But then I
Okay.
realized it was more just like, yeah, when
right.
do you just feel at your best in the day, throughout the day?
Yeah, and I would say on the days that are good, I have a tendency to be a lot more active in the later hours of the day. I'm not so much a morning person. Even at the day job, when I get there in the morning, I have a tendency to want to do the more kind of stand still, less focused tasks, things like that. Yeah, I'm definitely more of a night vampire person. But it's funny because these days that's been like steadily changing. Today I just like up and woke up. It's my day off of work. I didn't have to be up early, but I was. And I found myself in a position where it was getting close to noon. And I thought, wow, I normally do my podcast at about 7 o'clock when I'm kind of feeling at my prime in the day. But it's getting close to noon, and I'm like, oh, I know noon's a good time to do a podcast. Maybe I'll do it. And yeah, and so I'm feeling particularly energetic right now, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe today's just a weird day.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned like the
Mhm.
time you kind of normally would do something like this project really depends on the availability of my guests more so
Mhm.
than of myself. And because a lot of different people have different schedules, I'm largely dependent on like I'll suggest this time would be best for me, but if that
Yeah.
doesn't work for you, and so I've had to do a couple of these kind of a little bit later in the day, and I usually have less energy later in the day. So but I find because I'm excited to do this and I look forward to it, that like I kind of get a bit of a boost from preparing and then doing it. And then when I like finish
That
the
helps
call,
too.
then like I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, now I need to go have a nap because I'm like tired again.
No, I totally agree. Like, in doing this project, I found like newer reasons to be inspired and be motivated to do stuff. And it's kind of like it's a cyclical thing. It's the same way where when you kind of fall into like cyclical depression and stuff, where you're kind of trapped on the couch or in the bed and just like watching reruns of some familiar comforting show, and you're not really doing anything. You're just sort of in constant self-preservation mode. um yeah, again, see, I forgot what I was talking about there. But yeah, like I guess overcoming that is where we were going with that. um and breaking those cycles, it's the same thing in being productive. Yeah, you end up kind of in a productive cycle, maybe even like some people in mental health problems might describe it as being manic. I don't know if that's necessarily the case for me, but I definitely hit these strides where it's like just do everything and I can do it and I'm totally capable and I feel extremely motivated, and those are great days. But I feel like it's a matter of like finding that momentum and keeping it is kind of the key. That's both the hard and easy part at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So one kind of actually, you know what? We're running a little bit close to the end of the time limit I try to
Mhm.
put on these. So I
Yep.
think I was gonna ask another question, but I think I'm gonna bump that into the bonus episode,
Okay.
which you lovely viewers can get on Patreon or Coffee. I'll put a link up for you. But I think I'm going to try and add something here at the end of the episodes, as as the refining, like as you said, kind of refining as I go. I think I'm really getting close to what feels like the right overall kind of structure and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to just kind of take a second to acknowledge or give a shout out to certain causes or any kind of thing that you'd like to bring awareness to, like a charity or an organization. Like obviously everyone should support Black Lives Matter, and
Yep.
I also support Black Legal Action Fund is one of the ones that
Excellent.
I've got a recurring monthly donation for. But
Cool.
anything aside from that that you'd like to bring some awareness to?
Well, one of the things I'm trying to lean into right now, and we mention it at the end of every episode of the show, is we started calling it the nuts and bolts segment of the show. Like, what is the nuts and bolts of your community, of your day to day life, of the things that make up your life and improve standard of living for the people around you. So, like, not so much any singular charitable cause, but I like to promote the idea of reaching out to people in your community and, like, are there people in need? Are there senior citizens or people who are disabled that don't have regular access to be able to get groceries, or have solid lines of communication to their friends and loved ones? Do they even have friends and loved ones? Do we know this about our neighbors? And so I'm trying to, like, kind of in a grassroots way, promote the idea of just people connecting with each other. Because I feel like, especially in a place like Toronto, we have a tendency not to do that. And we kind of get isolated in our own little, comfortable circles and bubbles and stuff like that. And it's not to say that's a bad thing, but I think it can become, sort of like you become detached from certain other things. So there's that. And kind of along the same lines, I'm trying to promote the idea of people being more involved in not just that kind of community organization, but the sort of community organization that affects politics. Like, uh, who do you support? Who do you vote for? Like, I'm a big NDP supporter, so I'm going to be volunteering for the NDP. Is there a political kind of cause that you're behind, and what are you doing to support it? Because, yeah, in politics right now, especially in progressive circles, I feel like there's a lot of kind of it's all theory and no action sort of stuff. And so I'm trying to kind of get away from being wrapped in these loops of talking about theory, and more like, okay, what are we going to actually do to make a material difference in people's lives right away? And I think, volunteering for political causes is just one of the ways to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. If that is something that you have the capacity to do, I did briefly volunteer with the
Hmm.
NDP a few years back to just kind of go door to door leading up to the election, one of the elections.
Hmm.
Lately, like I also try to go to local protests and demonstrations when I feel physically up to it. Unfortunately, that's not always the case for me.
Especially these
But
days, it's a little riskier for some.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it was certainly with global pandemic, there's less of those kinds of things happening because it's more dangerous just
Yeah.
for everyone. But yeah, I think with that we are gonna wrap up this main episode here. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to plug your stuff, tell like anything obvious or unobvious, and
All
I'll
right.
throw it up on the screen.
Yeah, go to the Rough Go on Facebook. That's where a lot of the content for the podcast and my music is, but as well as at the Rough Go, all one word, no fancy symbols or anything, on Instagram and Twitter. So I always keep things updated there with everything that's going on, as well as the Rough Go channel on YouTube. That's also where the Rough Report, I did my first YouTube stream today, trying to get a little bit away from Facebook and diversify. And yeah, and keep an eye out on those pages, because more news about the upcoming new music is going to be there as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll throw up an overlay at the end of the video. We'll have all of
Sweet.
that on it. And yeah, so I guess the way that we're kind of ending these shows right now until I think of something else is that we throw on a hat and we wave goodbye to the good people. But before I do that, or as I do that, I guess I'll see if I can fit this. Yeah. I always put them.
That's a good one. Wow.
Actually, wait, you can't see. There's actually like a little flower thingy there.
It's hard to get it over my big studio headphones, but
I know that's the same problem.
That kind of works.
But yeah, I gotta try to get into the habit of remembering to say this because I had a problem on my vlog too. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, then I hope you'll like and subscribe and come back and watch future episodes. And each episode, if the guest is able to, we also do a bonus episode where we kind of just talk more freely, and you can get that for as little as $1 a month on Patreon. So I hope you will come over and check those out as well. With that, thank you for watching this episode of Hat Collecting, and I'll see you next time.